Imagine a vast, shimmering lake surrounded by mountainous terrain. This is Lake Texcoco, the ancient body of water that once cradled the sprawling capital of the Aztec Empire, Tenochtitlan. For many, it might seem an inhospitable place to settle. A large population, water everywhere, but limited land for growing crops. Yet, the Aztecs transformed this watery environment into a cradle of agricultural ingenuity, enabling a civilization of hundreds of thousands to thrive where others might have failed. The key to this success lay in the chinampas, man-made islands built from the lake bed that functioned as floating gardens. Unlike simple rafts, these chinampas were permanent agricultural plots, constructed by layering mud, sediment, and plant material over the lake's shallow parts. The result was a fertile, stable ground that seemed to float on the water. But how did the Aztecs come to develop this remarkable farming technique, and why was it so effective? Early settlers in the Valley of Mexico faced a pressing problem. The region's climate was semi-arid, with a rainy season that swelled Lake Texcoco and a dry season that parched the soil. The lake itself was brackish and prone to flooding, making traditional farming methods risky or impossible in many areas. However, the shallow lake beds contained nutrient-rich mud that, if harnessed properly, could be turned into a fertile foundation for crops. Historical accounts suggest that the chinampa system was not a sudden invention, but evolved over centuries. Some archaeological evidence points to the use of similar raised field farming in other parts of Mesoamerica long before the Aztecs. But it was in Tenochtitlan, the empire's capital, built around 1325 CE, that the technique was refined to its full potential. The construction process was labor-intensive and methodical. First, the Aztecs drove wooden stakes into the lakebed to outline the rectangular garden plots, often about 30 to 40 meters long and 3 to 4 meters wide. Then they piled up layers of mud, decaying vegetation, and other organic material inside these enclosures, creating a mound that rose above the waterline. The stakes were often tied together with reeds and roots to stabilize the structure, allowing it to withstand the lake's currents and fluctuating water levels. These plots were separated by narrow canals, just wide enough for canoes to navigate, making transportation of goods and people possible without stepping on the gardens themselves. The water around the chinampas not only provided natural irrigation, but also served as a barrier against pests. The lake's ecosystem, rich with fish, frogs, and birds, played a crucial role in maintaining a balanced environment. The soils of the chinampas were extraordinarily fertile, thanks to the constant replenishment of nutrients from lake sediment and decomposed plants. This allowed multiple crop cycles per year, a rarity in pre-modern agriculture. The Aztecs grew staples such as maize, beans, squash, and chili peppers, along with flowers and medicinal herbs. The chinampas supported a level of agricultural productivity that could feed tens of thousands of people within the city's limits. One of the subtle but essential features of the chinampa system was the way it managed water levels. Because Lake Texcoco's depth changed seasonally, the Aztecs had to ensure that their gardens would not drown or dry out. They built small canals and drainage systems that allowed excess water to flow away during the rainy season and retained moisture during drier months. This delicate balance of water management required constant attention and knowledge passed down through generations. The labor to build and maintain chinampas was performed by local communities, often family units or Kalpoli clan-like groups, reinforcing social cohesion. Everyone played a role, from planting and harvesting to repairing canal walls and monitoring water flow. The gardens were not just food sources, but centers of social and economic activity, deeply embedded in the rhythms of Aztec life. The success of the chinampas also had broader implications. With the ability to produce food close to the urban center, Tenochtitlan could sustain a large non-agricultural population, including artisans, warriors, priests, and rulers. This agricultural surplus supported the growth of markets, political power, and the famed Aztec military expeditions. The stability of these gardens depended on continuous labor and careful environmental management. Periods of drought, flooding, or social upheaval could threaten their productivity. Moreover, the arrival of the Spanish in the early 16th century would bring profound disruptions to this agricultural system. But for now, the floating gardens of the Aztecs stand as a testament to human resilience and adaptation by transforming a difficult landscape into a source of life. The Aztecs rewrote the rules of urban agriculture in a way that still inspires modern sustainability efforts. As you consider the intricate work involved in shaping the chinampas, a question arises. How did this system integrate with the wider social, political, and religious life of the Aztec Empire? What rituals or governance structures supported the management of these floating gardens? And how did they affect the daily lives of those who worked and lived around them? As you settle deeper into the world of the Aztec chinampas, imagine yourself walking along narrow earthen paths bordered by lush maize stalks, swaying gently in the breeze, the water softly lapping at the edges of these man-made islands. The floating gardens were not simply agricultural plots. They were vital living spaces that shaped the social and political fabric of Tenochtitlan. The Aztec Empire was organized in a way that intertwined agriculture, religion, and governance into a seamless whole. The chinampas, essential to food production, were carefully managed through a blend of communal effort and hierarchical oversight. At the heart of this system was the Kalpuli, a local clan or neighborhood unit that often controlled a cluster of chinampas. Each Kalpuli was responsible for cultivating its allotted chinampas, maintaining irrigation canals, and organizing labor. This structure created a rhythm of shared work and mutual obligation among members. Families passed down knowledge of planting techniques, soil management, and water control through oral traditions and practical experience. The Kalpuli also functioned as a political unit, electing local leaders called Tlatoani, who represented the community's interests within the larger imperial system. These leaders coordinated resource distribution, labor duties, and festivals linked to the agricultural calendar. In essence, chinampa cultivation was deeply embedded in social order and governance, reflecting the Aztecs' holistic approach to life. Religious life and agricultural work were inseparable. The Aztecs worshipped gods closely connected to fertility, water, and maize, the pillars of their subsistence. Xochipilli, the god of flowers and fertility, was honored with offerings from the chinampas' bounty. Likewise, Tlaloc, the rain god, was believed to control the crucial rains that replenished the lake and kept the chinampas fertile. Before planting and harvest, farmers performed rituals to ask for divine favor, ensuring that their efforts would yield abundant crops. These ceremonies often involved prayers, music, and symbolic offerings placed at sacred sites near the gardens. Priests and elders played key roles in guiding these rites, linking agriculture to spiritual well-being. Daily life on the chinampas was defined by labor-intensive tasks, requiring coordination and skill. Early mornings would see farmers setting out in canoes, navigating the narrow canals to reach their plots. They tended to maize seedlings, weeded carefully to avoid damaging fragile roots, and repaired embankments that prevented erosion. The canals served as transportation arteries, with canoes laden with tools, seeds, and harvested produce weaving through the maze of gardens. The water itself was teeming with fish, which villagers caught for food and traded in local markets. Frogs, birds, and aquatic plants were not just part of the ecosystem, but also influenced the health of the chinampas, creating a balanced environment resistant to pests and disease. One might assume the work was monotonous, but the farmers developed a profound understanding of seasonal cycles and ecological interactions. They knew precisely when to plant certain crops, how to rotate planting to maintain soil fertility, and how to harvest without damaging the system. This knowledge was accumulated over generations and taught carefully to children, ensuring the chinampa legacy endured. Women played vital roles in chinampa agriculture, while men often handled the heavier labor of building and repairing the garden foundations. Women were responsible for planting, harvesting, and preparing food from the garden's produce. They also managed seed storage and domestic gardens, expanding the agricultural base beyond the chinampas themselves. The abundance generated by the floating gardens fed not only local families, but also the bustling markets of Tenochtitlan. The city's main marketplace, Tlatelolco, was a hub where farmers sold excess crops, flowers, and medicinal plants. Traders transported these goods beyond the city, linking the chinampas to the vast trade networks that connected the Aztec world. The agricultural surplus enabled by chinampas supported specialized professions, artisans, priests, and soldiers, allowing the empire to thrive militarily and culturally. This surplus also played a political role. Rulers redistributed food to secure loyalty and display their power. Gifts of maize and other staples were symbolic as well as practical, reinforcing social bonds. However, managing this complex system was not without challenges. The canals and gardens required constant maintenance. Sediment had to be cleared to prevent blockages, embankments repaired to prevent flooding, and soil replenished to avoid exhaustion. Labor demands fluctuated with the seasons, and disruptions such as drought or political strife could jeopardize the entire food supply. Furthermore, the intense use of lake resources led to ecological concerns. Over time, some parts of Lake Texcoco became more saline due to natural changes and human activity, reducing the fertility of some chinampas. The Aztecs responded by expanding their gardens, altering canal routes, and experimenting with planting techniques. Despite these challenges, the chinampa system represented a sustainable model of urban agriculture, one that balanced human needs with environmental conditions. It was a delicate dance of ecology, economy, and society, finely tuned to the unique geography of the lake. As you picture this intricate network of gardens, canals, and communities, an intriguing question emerges. How did the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors disrupt this well-oiled system? What happened to the chinampas and the people who depended on them when foreign forces imposed new political and environmental realities? And could such a system survive or adapt under those pressures? By the early 16th century, the chinampas had firmly established themselves as the agricultural backbone of Tenochtitlan. But the arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in 1519 marked the beginning of profound disruption. Hernan Cortes and his forces were not merely invaders of land, they were agents of a seismic shift in the ecological and social fabric of the Aztec world, including the delicate floating gardens. Initially, the Spaniards were awestruck by the scale and ingenuity of Tenochtitlan. Bernal Diaz del Castillo, a chronicler and soldier who accompanied Cortes, described the city as a marvel of architecture and planning, with canals resembling the streets of Venice and chinampas stretching like green carpets across the lake. Yet, this admiration was tempered by a desire to impose Spanish control, reshape the landscape, and extract resources. The conquest itself was brutal and devastating. The siege of Tenochtitlan in 1521 led to widespread destruction and depopulation through warfare, famine, and disease, particularly smallpox, which ravaged indigenous communities. The social networks that had maintained chinampa cultivation, including the Calpulli and local governance structures, were shattered. With much of the population gone or displaced, the labor force that had sustained the chinampas dwindled. Maintenance of the intricate canals, embankments, and garden beds became sporadic or abandoned entirely. Over time, parts of the lake were drained or filled to accommodate Spanish-style urban expansion, disrupting the natural water flow critical to chinampa health. Moreover, the Spanish imposed new agricultural practices and land ownership systems. Large estates called haciendas replaced communal landholding patterns, and crops such as wheat and sugarcane were introduced. These changes often conflicted with traditional Aztec methods, reducing reliance on chinampas. Environmental factors also compounded the decline. The draining of Lake Texcoco to prevent flooding, a project that continued into colonial and modern times, drastically reduced the available area for chinampa farming. Without the constant supply of nutrient-rich lake water, soil fertility decreased. Despite these challenges, some chinampa cultivation persisted for decades and even centuries after conquest, particularly in rural or less accessible areas. Indigenous communities continued to rely on this method as a familiar and productive way of farming. It was a form of resistance and cultural preservation amid colonial pressures. In modern times, there has been a resurgence of interest in researchers and environmentalists recognize their sustainability-efficient water use, biodiversity support, and high productivity without synthetic inputs. Efforts to restore and protect surviving chinampas in the southern basin of Mexico City highlight their relevance to contemporary urban agriculture and ecological restoration. The story of the chinampas is a quiet testament to human ingenuity and adaptation. It reflects how a civilization once thrived by intimately understanding and working with its environment. Their legacy endures not only in archaeological sites and historical texts, but also in lessons for managing fragile ecosystems today. As you reflect on the rise and fall of the chinampa system, consider this: What does the fate of the floating gardens tell us about the broader relationship between human societies and their environments? How do political upheaval and cultural change influence sustainable practices? And in a world facing environmental challenges, might the Aztec example inspire new ways to live in harmony with nature? Picture yourself stepping into Tenochtitlan around the early 1500s, the Aztec capital nestled in the middle of Lake Texcoco. The city was unlike any other in the world, built on a network of islands connected by causeways and canals. From a distance, it might look like a mirage of temples and palaces rising from the mist-covered lake, with boats gliding silently through the waters. Yet, beneath this striking surface lay a complex urban environment where tens of thousands of people lived, worked, and thrived. Unlike cities on dry land, Tenochtitlan demanded extraordinary engineering and social organization. The foundations of the city rested on a swampy, unstable lakebed. To create solid ground, the Aztecs employed layers of volcanic rock, reeds, and soil, gradually building up the islands to support buildings and roads. These man-made islands, some natural and others artificial, were interconnected with wooden bridges and raised causeways that allowed foot traffic and wheeled goods to move freely. The causeways were especially vital. They stretched across the water, some several kilometers long, serving not only as transportation routes, but also as defensive barriers. Each causeway featured removable bridges that could be lifted during attacks, isolating the city from enemies. The Aztecs understood well the strategic importance of their watery environment, harnessing it to create a stronghold difficult for outsiders to penetrate. Within the city, canals acted as streets. Canoes ferried goods, people, and messages, weaving through the urban fabric. Markets bustled along these waterways, with vendors calling out their wares: maize, cacao feathers, pottery, and exotic foods. The vibrant commerce was the lifeblood of Tenochtitlan, sustaining both its inhabitants and the empire's far-flung territories. Housing in Tenochtitlan reflected social status and occupation. Commoners typically lived in simple reed and mud brick houses clustered along canals or narrow streets. These homes often had a single room, with mats for sleeping and clay pots for cooking. Family life was communal, with multiple generations sharing space and responsibilities. Nobles and priests, by contrast, occupied larger compounds, often made of stone and decorated with murals and carved reliefs. Palaces and temples towered above the rest of the city, emphasizing political and religious authority. These structures were carefully aligned with celestial events, underscoring the Aztecs' deep connection between urban design and cosmology. Daily life revolved around a strict schedule. Dawn marked the start of household chores, fetching water from canals, preparing food, weaving cloth, and caring for children. Men and women had distinct roles, though cooperation was essential. Men might work as farmers, artisans, or warriors, while women managed domestic tasks. Education was highly valued. Children attended comm schools, called Comica, and Telpochacali, where they learned history, religion, and practical skills. This education reinforced social values and prepared youth for their future roles in society. They dug drainage canals to divert rainwater, preventing floods during the wet season. Some houses had rudimentary toilets connected to cesspits, and waste was periodically removed by workers, a practice crucial for urban health. Food preparation was central to daily routines. Maize tortillas were a staple, complemented by beans, squash, chili peppers, and occasional protein from fish or game. Markets provided spices, flowers, and cacao for those who could afford luxuries. Food was often prepared using Kamal's flat griddles and clay pots heated over wood fires. The soundscape of Tenochtitlan was a mixture of gentle water lapping, distant drums from temples, vendor calls, and the chatter of neighbors. Despite the city's size, the environment was surprisingly orderly, maintained through community cooperation and regulation. The city's residents also balanced their lives with spiritual observances. Daily prayers and offerings to household gods were common, reflecting the belief that maintaining cosmic harmony required attention at every level, from empire to family. As you imagine walking these streets and canals, an open question emerges. How did the Aztecs maintain order and cohesion in such a complex and dense environment? What laws, customs, or institutions helped the city function smoothly despite its unique challenges? And how did ordinary people experience the pressures and privileges of urban life on water? As you continue to wander through Tenochtitlan's labyrinth of canals and causeways, it becomes clear that this wasn't just a city of architectural marvels, but one bound tightly by laws and customs. The Aztecs developed an intricate legal system that regulated daily life, ensuring that the city's complex social interactions didn't unravel in chaos. At the heart of this system was the Tlatoani, the ruler of Tenochtitlan, whose authority extended from the highest nobles to the humblest citizens. The Tlatoani was supported by councils of nobles and priests who interpreted laws and administered justice. However, law enforcement was localized. Kelpless clan units had their own leaders and judges who managed disputes within their communities. The laws themselves were famously strict, designed to maintain public order and respect for social hierarchy. Crimes such as theft, adultery, and drunkenness were met with harsh penalties, sometimes even death. This severity reflected a cultural emphasis on discipline and responsibility, critical in a densely populated city where disorder could spread quickly. But law was not solely punitive. It also prescribed moral and social duties, guiding everyday behavior. For example, there were rules about marketplace conduct to prevent cheating, regulations on how to dress according to social class, and norms governing marriage and family life. Children were expected to learn these from an early age, often through oral instruction and communal reinforcement. The Aztec legal system included the Comicac and Telpochcali schools mentioned earlier, which were not only educational but also moral institutions. Young people learned about their roles, responsibilities, and the importance of social harmony, preparing them to contribute positively to city life. Religious observance was tightly woven into this social fabric. Temples dotted the city, with the great Templo Mayor standing at the center, symbolizing the union of political and spiritual power. Festivals and rituals punctuated the year, often involving the entire population in ceremonies designed to honor gods, ensure agricultural fertility, and mark seasonal changes. These events reinforced community bonds and reminded citizens of their place in the cosmic order. Priests held considerable influence, advising rulers and guiding moral conduct. Their interpretations of omens and calendars shaped decisions affecting everything from planting crops to waging war. Daily routines in the city were highly organized to optimize resource use and minimize conflict. For example, market days were regulated to prevent overcrowding, and certain trades were restricted to specific neighborhoods. Labor was communal, but also specialized. Craftsmen such as potters, weavers, and feather workers formed guilds with their own traditions and apprenticeships. Water management remained a constant concern. Canals required regular dredging to prevent stagnation and maintain navigability. The city had designated workers, tomams, who carried goods on their backs where boats couldn't go, facilitating trade and communication. This physical labor underscored the city's reliance on human effort to sustain itself. Despite the strictness of laws and social order, life in Tenochtitlan was not devoid of leisure. Music, dance, and poetry were vital to Aztec culture. Nobles often sponsored performances, and commoners enjoyed communal celebrations during festivals. Sports like Tlachtli, a ball game with ritual significance, provided both entertainment and spiritual meaning. However, the pressures of urban life were tangible. Crowding, disease, and occasional food shortages challenged residents. The city's success depended on careful management of these risks, balancing growth with sustainability. Families adapted by forming tight-knit support networks, pooling resources, and passing on survival strategies. You might wonder how such a city, thriving with so many demands, kept its people motivated and unified. What role did ideology and belief play in holding together such a multifaceted society? How did the Aztecs balance individual needs against collective order in their daily lives? And how did the city's physical structure influence social interactions? Did water separate communities or bring them closer? As you drift through the canals of Tenochtitlan one last time, it becomes clear that the city was a marvel of human cooperation, a place where social order, religious belief, and practical necessity blended seamlessly. This unity, carefully maintained through law, ritual, and communal effort, was essential for a metropolis built literally on water. The city's design encouraged both separation and connection. The waterways created boundaries between neighborhoods, yet also linked them in a continuous flow of commerce and communication. Shared marketplaces and festivals created a sense of belonging that transcended the physical divisions. One of the most striking features of daily life was the adaptability of the Aztec people. Despite the challenges of swampy foundations, crowded living spaces, and the constant need for maintenance, they engineered solutions that allowed their city to flourish. Labor was organized, resources recycled, and social roles clearly defined to avoid conflict. But no city, no matter how ingenious, is immune to external pressures. The arrival of the Spanish conquistadors in 1519 brought not only military conquest, but a wave of disease and cultural disruption that the Aztecs had never faced. Smallpox swept through the population, decimating communities and severing the social bonds that had held Tenochtitlan together. The Spanish systematically dismantled the city's infrastructure, draining parts of the lake and replacing canals with streets. The great temples were razed or repurposed, erasing physical symbols of Aztec identity. the calpulli and local governance. Systems were replaced with colonial administrations. This destruction of urban life meant more than just the loss of buildings. It severed the intricate web of social relationships, laws, and shared practices that had sustained the city. Survivors struggled to maintain traditions, but the rhythm of daily life changed irreversibly. Yet, the legacy of Tenochtitlan's social and urban ingenuity persists. Today, Mexico City stands atop the ruins of the ancient metropolis, its streets and waterways echoing the past. Archaeological discoveries continue to reveal how the Aztecs lived, worked, and governed in this extraordinary city on water, reflecting on Tenochtitlan's rise and fall. You might ask, what lessons does this city offer about human resilience in challenging environments? How do social structures adapt or collapse under the pressure of conquest and change? And how do the physical landscapes we build shape the lives and identities of their inhabitants over centuries? Imagine waking up before dawn, somewhere in the vast Roman Empire, perhaps in a makeshift camp by a dusty stretch of wilderness. Your task, to build a rota stretch of hard-packed stone and gravel that will carry soldiers, merchants, and messengers across hundreds of miles. This was the daily reality for thousands of Roman road builders, a workforce essential to Rome's expansion and control. Roman roads were more than mere paths. They were marvels of engineering designed for durability and efficiency. But behind their enduring stone surfaces lay countless hours of sweat, toil, and meticulous planning by laborers who often remain nameless in history. Understanding their work offers a window into the empire's backbone and the gritty realities of ancient infrastructure. Road construction started with surveying. Roman engineers, known as agrimensors, used tools like the groma wooden cross, with plumb lines to measure straight lines and right angles. These measurements were crucial for creating roads that cut as directly as possible through varied terrain, balancing military expediency with geographical challenges. Once the route was mapped, laborers, often soldiers, slaves, or local workers, conscripted for the project, began clearing the path. Trees were felled, rocks removed, and the ground leveled. The Romans preferred a layered construction method, a deep foundation of large stones, stadamen, followed by layers of gravel and sand, rudis and nucleus, and finally paving stones, summa crusta, meticulously fitted to create a smooth, hard surface. Work was grueling. Laborers wielded picks, shovels, and wooden mallets under the hot sun. Camps were rudimentary, with tents or simple huts, and food was basic bread, salted meat, and water. The physical demands meant injuries were common, and medical care was limited. Despite the harsh conditions, the workforce was disciplined. Military units assigned to road building adhered to strict schedules and roles. Engineering officers supervised progress, ensuring standards were met. This organization was critical. A poorly built road could crumble under traffic or weather, undermining Rome's control. Roads often featured drainage ditches on either side to prevent flooding, and milestones marked distances, a practical but also psychological reminder of Roman order spreading across the land. Bridges and tunnels were constructed where necessary, showcasing Roman adaptability. The social composition of the workforce was diverse. Soldiers gained engineering and construction experience. Slaves provided manual labor, and local populations might be compelled to contribute materials or labor under corvée obligations. This mixture sometimes led to tensions, but it also reflected the empire's complexity. Beyond construction, maintaining roads was a constant task. Crews repaired where cleared debris, and ensured markers were visible. This ongoing labor maintained the veins that pumped life into the empire troops' trade and information. As you consider the relentless labor of these builders, an intriguing question arises. How did the Roman state motivate and manage such a vast workforce across diverse regions? What everyday challenges did these workers face beyond the physical? And what can their story tell us about the unseen efforts underpinning great civilizations? Continuing from the foundations laid by Roman engineers, the daily lives of the road builders reveal a complex world of hierarchy, hardship, and adaptation. Behind the grand narrative of empire expansion lies the gritty reality faced by workers who carved Rome's arteries through the wilderness. The workforce was far from uniform. At the top were military engineers and officers, often trained in both combat and construction. Their knowledge of geometry, surveying, and materials science was crucial in planning routes that balanced straightness with practical terrain considerations. They coordinated teams, issued orders, and managed supplies, acting as the linchpins between Rome's political ambitions and the sweat of manual labor. Soldiers assigned to road construction gained not only engineering skills, but also a sense of discipline and teamwork. These units were rotated regularly, mixing road work with combat duties. This arrangement helped maintain morale and ensured the empire could rapidly mobilize labor when new roads were needed. Slaves and local laborers made up the bulk of the workforce, performing the most physically demanding tasks. Their treatment varied widely. Some were housed in basic camps, while others endured harsher conditions, often under overseers wielding strict discipline. The local populations sometimes saw road projects as burdensome taxes forced labor, known as opera publica, fueling resentment that simmered beneath the surface. Food and water logistics were critical. Camps relied on supplies carried over existing roads or waterways. Food was simple stale bread, salted pork or fish, olives, and occasionally fresh produce. Drinking water had to be carefully sourced and conserved. Illness was common, with dysentery and respiratory infections exacerbated by dust, cold nights, and physical exhaustion. Despite hardships, camaraderie and routine created a semblance of community. Workers shared stories, songs, and religious rituals, often invoking deities like Mercury, god of travelers and commerce, or Terminus, protector of boundaries. Such practices provided psychological relief amid the monotony and danger of the work. Technological challenges were constant. Engineers had to adapt construction methods to forests, mountains, rivers, and marshlands. In swampy areas, for example, roads were built on wooden pilings or layered with brush and gravel to prevent sinking. Bridges required carpenters and stonemasons, while tunnels demanded precise excavation and shoring. Political pressures also influenced projects. Road building was a statement of Roman authority and civilization. Governors competed to construct impressive routes, gaining prestige and political capital. However, funding and manpower could be unpredictable, delaying work and frustrating supervisors. Communication across vast distances depended on the very roads being built, creating a paradox of dependency. Couriers traveled the completed segments, while unfinished stretches slowed message delivery. This tension added urgency to construction, but also highlighted the fragility of imperial control. As you consider the complex logistics and human stories embedded in every mile of Roman road, questions arise. How did the builders balance pride in their work with the grueling demands placed upon them? What social tensions simmered beneath the surface of this massive labor machine? And how did the roads themselves become symbols of Roman power beyond their practical use? As the sun sets over a newly completed stretch of Roman road, the laborers, slaves, and local workers alike step back from their work, weary but accomplished. These roads, stretching thousands of miles across the empire, did far more than facilitate movement. They became the physical embodiment of Rome's reach, resilience, and ambition. The impact of these roads was profound. Militarily, they allowed legions to deploy quickly, securing borders and suppressing rebellions. Economically, they connected distant markets, enabling the flow of goods, people, and ideas. Administratively, they tied far-flung provinces to Rome's political center, helping maintain order in an enormous, diverse empire. Yet, the road builders themselves rarely received credit. Their lives were marked by repetitive toil, exposure to harsh elements, and the ever-present danger of injury or illness. Their stories are often lost beneath the grandeur of Roman architecture and conquest, but their work laid the groundwork for centuries of civilization. Maintenance became as important as construction. Roads required constant repair to withstand weather and heavy use. Local communities often bore responsibility for upkeep, linking their fortunes to the road's condition. This continuous labor kept the empire connected long after initial construction. When Rome eventually declined, many roads fell into disrepair. However, their roots influenced medieval and even modern roadways, a testament to the enduring nature of Roman engineering. The network facilitated not only imperial control, but also cultural exchange, migration, and the spread of ideas including Christianity. Reflecting on the lives of these builders, you might consider the hidden labor that supports great achievements. How often do the names and experiences of those who build empires fade into the background? What does the Roman road-building effort reveal about human resilience, organization, and the costs of empire? And finally, how do modern infrastructure projects echo these ancient endeavors, balancing ambition with the realities of human toil and environmental challenge? Imagine waking up in a medieval monastery nestled in the countryside, surrounded not by bustling towns or noisy markets, but by carefully tended gardens. These gardens weren't just for beauty, they were essential to monastic life, combining spirituality, self-sufficiency, and practical medicine. Monks lived by strict rules that governed every aspect of their day, including their relationship with the land. The garden was a microcosm of their spiritual and physical world, a place where the sacred met the mundane. It was here they grew herbs, vegetables, and flowers, sustaining the community and embodying divine order. Monastic gardens evolved from simple plots to complex designs influenced by Roman and early Christian traditions. The layout was often geometric, reflecting the medieval worldview of harmony and balance. Paths, divided beds, water channels, irrigated herbs, and walls protected against animals and intruders. Herbs were perhaps the most valued plants. Species like lavender, rosemary, sage, and fennel were cultivated not just for flavoring food, but for medicinal properties. Monks copied and preserved ancient texts describing these herbs, making the garden a living pharmacy. Vegetable plots provided staples such as cabbage, onions, and beans. These crops ensured sustenance during fast days. When meat was forbidden, fruit trees like apples and pears added variety and nutrition. Flowers, including roses and violets, had symbolic meanings and were used in religious ceremonies. Gardeners within the monastery were often monks themselves, dedicated to their labor as a form of prayer. The work required patience and knowledge understanding, planting cycles, soil conditions, and seasonal changes. Despite the seemingly slow pace, gardening was a technical skill passed down and refined. Water management was crucial. Many monasteries featured wells, cisterns, or simple irrigation systems to keep plants healthy. Monks monitored weather patterns and adapted care accordingly, a careful balance of observation and intervention. The garden also served a social role. It was a place for quiet reflection, education, and sometimes healing visitors. The produce might be shared with the poor, extending the monastery's influence beyond its walls. However, gardens faced challenges: pests, poor harvests, and the limitations of medieval farming tools. These difficulties demanded resilience and innovation, often recorded in monastic chronicles. As you stroll through these tranquil spaces, you might wonder, how did the monks' spiritual beliefs shape their gardening practices? What practical knowledge did they preserve and develop in relative isolation? And how did these gardens influence broader medieval society and its relationship with nature? In the daily rhythm of monastery life, the garden was both a sacred space and a hub of practical activity. Monks approached their gardening duties with deliberate care, guided by centuries-old wisdom and a keen awareness of nature's cycles. Their hands tilled the earth not only to grow food and medicine, but to cultivate patience, humility, and a closer connection to the divine. The work began early, often at first light, with prayers that framed the day's labor as an act of devotion. Planting, weeding, watering chask was performed mindfully, seen as a form of meditation. The monks believed that tending the garden was a way to imitate God's creation, maintaining order amidst the natural chaos. Technical knowledge was surprisingly advanced. Monks experimented with crop rotation to preserve soil fertility, a practice not widely used outside monastic communities. They understood companion planting, growing certain herbs and vegetables side by side to improve growth and deter pests. For example, garlic might be planted near roses to ward off aphids. Herbalism was central. Monks carefully observed the properties of each plant, harvesting at precise times to maximize potency. Recipes for remedies, tinctures, poultices, and infusions were recorded in manuscripts, some of which survive today. These botanical preparations treated ailments ranging from digestive issues to wounds, serving both the monastic community and local villagers. Garden design itself was intentional. Enclosed by stone walls or hedges, the garden was protected from wild animals and symbolized a sanctuary. Water features, ponds or channels, reflected light and sound, adding a contemplative ambience. Paths were laid out to encourage slow, deliberate movement, allowing monks to engage with the plants and with their thoughts. Seasonal festivals punctuated the gardening calendar. Celebrations of planting and harvest tied the community to the cycles of nature and faith. Rituals blessed the land and expressed gratitude for its bounty, reinforcing a worldview that saw humans as caretakers of creation. Despite these careful practices, gardens were vulnerable to weather extremes. Pests like caterpillars and aphids and occasional crop failures. Monks adapted by maintaining seed libraries, sharing knowledge with nearby monasteries, and developing preservation techniques such as drying herbs for winter use. Gardening was also a social and educational endeavor. Novice monks learned from experienced gardeners, passing on skills that blended manual labor with spiritual insight. The garden became a classroom, teaching patience, observation, and respect for life's cycles. As you walk these cloistered gardens, you might wonder, how did the monks balance the demands of self-sufficiency with their spiritual goals? In what ways did their gardening practices influence wider medieval agriculture and medicine? And how did the quiet persistence of these green spaces shape the rhythms of monastic and, ultimately, medieval life? As the seasons turn and centuries pass, the quiet gardens of medieval monasteries continue to whisper their stories. These cultivated patches of earth were more than just practical necessities. They were living classrooms, spiritual sanctuaries, and custodians of botanical knowledge that bridged ancient and modern worlds. The legacy of monastic gardening is profound. The techniques developed and refined within monastery walls, crop rotation, companion planting, herbal medicine, formed the foundation of later agricultural advancements. Monks preserved classical knowledge through turbulent times, copying manuscripts that detailed plant uses and cultivation methods, ensuring this wisdom survived the fall of Rome and the upheavals of medieval Europe. Monastery gardens influenced the development of early botany and pharmacy. Herb gardens became prototypes for botanical gardens, which emerged in Renaissance Italy as centers of scientific study. The medicinal herbs, once grown for monks and local patients, laid the groundwork for modern pharmacology. Spiritually, the gardens shaped the monastic worldview, emphasizing harmony between humanity and nature. This ethos inspired later movements in garden design, from Renaissance formal gardens to romantic naturalism, echoing the balance and contemplation first cultivated in monastic cloisters. The social impact was also significant. Monasteries often served as community centers, providing food, medicine, and hospitality. Their gardens were vital in sustaining these roles, linking spiritual care with practical support. This blend of service and stewardship helped monasteries endure as key institutions through centuries of change. Yet, the gardens also symbolize resilience in the face of adversity. Despite wars, plagues, and political upheaval, these green spaces persisted, adapted, and inspired. They remind us that history is not only shaped by battles and rulers, but by quiet labor, patience, and the cultivation of life itself. As you reflect on the serene monastery garden, consider this: how do spaces of quiet labor and contemplation influence human culture and survival? In a world often dominated by haste and conflict, what can we learn from the monks' patient tending of the earth? And how might their legacy inform our relationship with nature today? Picture yourself wandering the narrow, winding streets of a medieval town. The air is thick with the scent of wood smoke, leather, and metal. Around you, craftsmen labor in small workshops, their hands shaping the raw materials of daily life tools, clothing, furniture, and more. These craftsmen were organized into guilds, social and economic institutions that shaped the fabric of medieval urban life. Guilds were more than just trade associations. They were communities with rules, traditions, and power structures. Each guild regulated quality, controlled prices, trained apprentices, and provided social support for its members. From blacksmiths and weavers to shoemakers and masons, guilds formed the backbone of the medieval economy. The origins of guilds date back to the early Middle Ages, when craftsmen began banding together to protect their interests from outside competition and to negotiate with city authorities. Guilds maintained strict membership controls to ensure the quality of their products and the stability of their trade. Apprenticeship was central to guild life. Young boys, often as young as 10 or 12, entered into agreements to learn a craft under a master's guidance for several years. This long, often grueling process ensured skills were passed down with precision and preserved the guild's reputation. Guilds also provided social welfare. They cared for members who were sick or elderly, arranged funerals, and sometimes supported members' families. This mutual aid fostered loyalty and cohesion within the guild, creating a tight-knit community. In an otherwise fragmented urban environment, the physical workshops were often small, cramped spaces located along bustling streets. Craft production was hands-on and labor-intensive, relying on simple but effective tools. The sound of hammers on anvils, the rhythmic clatter of looms, and the pungent smell of tanning hides created a distinctive sensory world. Guilds exercised political influence, often controlling local regulations related to trade, wages, and working conditions. In some cities, guild leaders held seats on municipal councils, intertwining craft organization with urban governance. Despite their power, guilds faced challenges. Rivalry between guilds could be fierce, and conflicts over market control were common. Economic downturns, wars, and plague outbreaks disrupted production and strained guild resources. As you step back from the busy workshops and cobblestone streets, you might ask, how did guilds balance tradition and innovation in their crafts? What daily struggles did craftsmen face in preserving their livelihoods? And how did these organizations shape the social and economic life of medieval towns beyond their immediate trades? Inside the walls of a guild hall, life was structured by a complex set of rules and customs that governed every aspect of a craftsman's career. These regulations ensured the quality of work, protected members from unfair competition, and preserved the guild's status in the town's social hierarchy. But behind the order lay daily challenges and social tensions. Guilds operated on strict hierarchies. Apprentices, the youngest and least experienced, learned the basics under a master craftsman's watchful eye. After years of training, they could become journeymen, allowed to work for wages, but not yet full members. Achieving master status required producing a masterpiece of work, demonstrating skill and creativity, and gaining approval from the guild council. This progression was not just about craftsmanship, but about social mobility within the guild community. Masters enjoyed privileges, voting rights in guild decisions, the ability to take on apprentices, and a share in guild-managed welfare funds. Journeymen and apprentices had fewer rights and often lived in modest quarters near their workshops. The guild's economic role was vital. By controlling the supply of goods and setting prices, guilds regulated local markets. This control helped maintain standards, but could also stifle innovation or limit competition, leading to tensions within the community and with town authorities. Conflict was common, both within and between guilds. Disputes over market rights, accusations of cheating, or breaking guild rules could result in fines, public shaming, or even expulsion. Rival guilds sometimes engaged in heated competition, with political alliances shaping the outcomes. Guilds also navigated external challenges. Economic downturns, such as famines or wars, reduced demand for goods, forcing craftsmen to adjust prices or production. The Black Death, sweeping through Europe in the 14th century, devastated populations, disrupting guild membership and labor supply. Despite hardships, guilds fostered social solidarity. Members gathered for religious festivals, banquets, and charity events. These occasions reinforced bonds and allowed for informal networking. Guild chapels and patron saints provided spiritual support, intertwining faith with daily work. Technological change was a slow process within guilds. While some innovations, new tools, or techniques were adopted cautiously, others were resisted. To protect established methods and the status quo, this conservatism ensured quality, but sometimes hindered progress. Through these structures and struggles, guilds shaped the urban landscape. Workshops clustered in designated quarters, and guild halls stood as centers of power and pride. Their influence extended beyond crafts to the civic and cultural life of medieval towns. As you consider the daily lives of these craftsmen and their guilds, questions emerge. How did individual craftsmen navigate the tensions between tradition and change? What role did guilds play in shaping social identity and community cohesion? And how did their influence wane as economic and social transformations unfolded in later centuries? As the medieval era gave way to the early modern period, the once powerful guilds began to lose their grip on economic and social life. Changing political structures, emerging capitalist markets, and technological advancements challenged the guilds' tightly controlled systems, yet their legacy endures, shaping both the physical and cultural landscapes of Europe. The rise of centralized states reduced the autonomy of guilds. Monarchs and city governments sought to regulate trade directly, often curtailing guild privileges. New forms of commerce, merchant capitalism, proto-industrial workshops, and early factories bypassed guild controls, introducing competition on an unprecedented scale. Industrialization further accelerated this decline. Mass production and mechanization rendered many traditional crafts obsolete or transformed them drastically. The apprenticeship system eroded, replaced by formal schooling and factory labor. Guilds' social welfare roles diminished as states took over public services. Despite this, guilds left enduring marks. The physical layout of medieval towns, with artisan quarters and guild halls, remains visible in many European cities today. Their insistence on quality and standards influenced the development of professional codes and trade regulations. Still in place, culturally, guilds contributed to community identity, artistic traditions, and the preservation of craftsmanship knowledge. The rituals, festivals, and patron saints of guilds shaped social cohesion and local culture, fostering a sense of belonging that extended beyond work. Reflecting on the guild's story, one sees the tension between control and innovation, community and competition. Guilds preserved skills and supported their members, but also resisted change, illustrating the challenges institutions face in balancing tradition with adaptation. As you think about these forgotten guilds and their craftsmen, consider what lessons do their successes and struggles offer for modern professional organizations? How do communities today maintain the balance between preserving tradition and embracing innovation? And in what ways does the spirit of these medieval guilds live on in contemporary trades and crafts? Imagine stepping into a bustling Victorian factory in the heart of 19th century England. The air is thick with smoke and dust. The cacophony of clanging machines, whistles, and shouted commands fills the space. Rows of workers, men, women, and children move in rhythmic patterns, operating steam-powered looms, spinning jennies, or heavy presses. Factories were the engines of the Industrial Revolution, transforming economies and societies. Yet behind the innovation lay the hidden lives of the workers whose labor powered this transformation. Long hours, dangerous conditions, and meager wages defined their experience, often invisible to the rising middle-class observers who benefited from industrial growth. Workers endured shifts lasting 12 to 16 hours, 6 days a week. Safety regulations were minimal or non-existent. Accidents were common. Children as young as 5 or 6 operated machines or crawled under equipment to fix jams. Their small hands, both an asset and a source of exploitation. Housing conditions mirrored factory life. Many workers lived in cramped, poorly ventilated slums near factories, where disease and poverty were rampant. Families often depended on every member's income, stretching meager wages to cover rent, food, and clothing. Despite hardships, factory work provided a steady income and a measure of independence for many. The factory also became a social environment where workers formed friendships, shared news, and developed a collective identity. Labor unrest simmered beneath the surface. Strikes and protests were frequent as workers demanded better wages, shorter hours, and safer conditions. However, legal protections were limited, and many faced dismissal or blacklisting for organizing. The factory owners, often distant and detached from daily realities, prioritized productivity and profit. Their attitudes shaped workplace policies and responses to labor demands, creating tensions that echoed through Victorian society. As you imagine the relentless pace and harsh realities of factory life, you might wonder, how did workers cope with such demanding conditions? In what ways did factory work reshape family and community life? And how did these hidden lives influence the broader social and political changes of the era? Inside the relentless grind of Victorian factories, workers developed strategies to endure long hours and dangerous conditions. Their daily lives were marked not only by physical toil, but by a complex web of social relationships. Resilience, and quiet acts of defiance. The factory whistle dictated every moment, starting early in the morning and often lasting until late at night, with few breaks. Workers had little control over their schedules, and exhaustion was a constant companion. Injuries were common, from crushed fingers to respiratory illnesses caused by dust and poor ventilation. Families depended on multiple wages to survive. Children worked alongside adults, performing tasks suited to their size, but also exposing them to exploitation and harm. Education was often a luxury many could not afford, as working took priority over schooling. Yet, amid hardship, a sense of community flourished. Workers gathered in local pubs, churches, and markets, sharing news, stories, and support. Informal networks helped families cope during illness or unemployment. Trade unions, though still emerging and often suppressed, began to organize collective action. Women faced additional challenges. They earned less than men, performed the most repetitive and strenuous tasks, and balanced work with domestic duties. Their labor was vital but undervalued, often overlooked in official records and social reforms. Despite oppressive conditions, workers displayed remarkable ingenuity, selling out strategies, occasional slowdowns, or subtle work refusals loud. Brief relief from the relentless pace. Humor, songs, and storytelling offered mental escapes, preserving dignity and morale. Public awareness of factory conditions grew slowly. Reformers, journalists, and social investigators documented abuses, fueling campaigns for labor laws and improved standards. These efforts culminated in legislation like the Factory Acts, which began limiting child labor and regulating hours. Still, enforcement was patchy, and many workers continued to face exploitation. The factory remained a place of tension between profit and people, a battleground for rights and recognition. As you consider the lives behind the machines, ask yourself, how did workers' solidarity and quiet resistance shape the labor movement? What roles did gender and family play in coping with industrial life? And how did these hidden stories contribute to the social reforms that followed? The lives of Victorian factory workers left a lasting imprint on society, politics, and culture far beyond the smoke-filled rooms of the mills and workshops. Their daily struggles, resilience, and collective action helped reshape the modern world in ways that are often forgotten beneath the surface of grand historical narratives. Labor reforms that began in the late 19th century, limiting working hours, regulating child labor, improving workplace safety, were born from the voices and experiences of these workers. Though progress was slow and uneven, it marked the beginning of a new relationship between labor and capital, setting precedents for future workers' rights movements worldwide. The family dynamics forged in industrial neighborhoods also influenced social welfare developments. The challenges of poverty, overcrowding, and ill health highlighted the need for public health initiatives, housing reforms, and education. Workers, communities became centers for political activism, fostering early labor parties and cooperative movements. Culturally, the experiences of factory workers permeated literature, art, and music, giving voice to often invisible lives. Novels by Charles Dickens and Elizabeth Gaskell, for example, drew attention to social inequities, while folk songs preserved stories of hardship and hope. Yet the harsh realities of factory life remind us that industrial progress was not simply a story of technological triumph, but of human cost and endurance. These workers lived at the margins of history's grand events, but their perseverance underpinned the economic and social transformations of their time. As you reflect on their hidden lives, consider, how do we remember and honor the labor that fuels progress? What lessons do these stories offer for today's workforce in an age of automation and globalization? And how might acknowledging these past struggles deepen our understanding of modern social justice? Imagine standing on a dusty Roman road, cutting through the Italian countryside nearly 2 millennia ago. Beneath your feet lies a marvel of engineering, a road built with precision, endurance, and a labor force whose names and stories remain largely unrecorded. These roads connected the sprawling Roman Empire, enabling armies, traders, and officials to move swiftly across continents. The creation of this vast network required immense manpower. Thousands of laborers, including soldiers, slaves, and local workers, toiled to construct roads that stretched over 400,000 kilometers at the empire's height. Their work involved clearing land, digging trenches, laying layered foundations, and paving surfaces with stone. Road construction was a highly organized endeavor. Military engineers, known as architecti, planned routes with meticulous care to balance directness and terrain challenges. Surveyors measured distances and gradients using tools like the groma and chorobates. Work crews followed these plans under strict supervision. The workforce was diverse. Soldiers often doubled as laborers during peacetime, their discipline and organization making them effective builders. Slaves and local inhabitants provided additional labor, sometimes under harsh conditions. Archaeological evidence suggests varied treatment, from skilled labor to forced hard labor. The roads themselves were feats of durability. Layers included a bottom foundation of large stones, followed by smaller stones, gravel, and tightly fitted paving stones on top. Drainage ditches flanked the roads to prevent water damage. Milestones marked distances, while way stations and forts dotted the routes. The roads transformed Roman society. Military campaigns became more efficient, trade flourished, and cultural exchange increased. The phrase, "all roads lead to Rome," captured the centrality of this network. Yet, the human cost behind the roads is often overlooked. Laborers faced dangerous work, difficult terrain, and harsh climates. The physical toll was enormous, and many workers remain anonymous, their lives lost to history. As you picture the dust and sweat of the road builders, consider, how did the laborers' experiences shape the expansion and maintenance of the Roman Empire? What social and economic impacts did road construction have on local communities? And what does the silence surrounding these workers tell us about how history remembers labor? The labor behind the Roman roads was as varied as the empire itself. Soldiers, slaves, convicts, and local peasants all played roles in this massive construction effort. Each group brought different skills, social statuses, and motivations to the arduous task of transforming wilderness into the empire's arteries. Soldiers were often the backbone of road-building projects. When not engaged in military campaigns, legionaries undertook construction duties as part of their service. Their training and discipline made them efficient laborers, and building infrastructure was a means of maintaining readiness and order. However, their work was demanding involving heavy manual labor in sometimes hostile environments. Slaves and convicts provided much of the unskilled labor. Many were forced into back-breaking tasks with little regard for safety or comfort. Their work was essential but uncelebrated, and their living conditions near construction sites were typically harsh, with inadequate shelter and food. Local communities felt the impact of road projects in multiple ways. While some benefited from improved access to markets and resources, others experienced disruption of land confiscation, forced labor requisitions, and environmental changes. The presence of workers and military detachments often altered social dynamics, sometimes provoking tensions or cooperation. Logistics of road construction were complex. Supplies of stone, gravel, timber, and tools had to be sourced locally or transported long distances. Temporary camps housed workers and supply chains had to be maintained in often rugged and remote regions. The coordination required reveals a sophisticated administrative system. Despite the scale of these efforts, the laborers' contributions were rarely commemorated. Roman historians and official records focused on emperors and generals, leaving the daily toil of builders obscured. Archaeological findings, tools, remnants of camps, and unfinished roads offer glimpses, but cannot fully restore their stories. The work was grueling and dangerous. Accidents, exposure to weather, and disease were constant threats. Many workers likely suffered from chronic injuries or died young, their sacrifices integral to Rome's enduring infrastructure. As you imagine, these roadside camps, filled with the sounds of chisels and hammers, ask yourself, what were the personal experiences and motivations of these workers? How did the construction projects shape local economies and societies? And what might their stories reveal about the broader human cost behind Rome's imperial grandeur? The Roman roads stand as lasting monuments to one of history's greatest engineering achievements. Yet, the hands that shaped these pathways remain largely invisible in the annals of history. As time passed, the roads themselves became symbols of Roman power and unity, but the laborers' stories faded into silence. The legacy of these roads is immense. They facilitated the movement of armies, merchants, and ideas, knitting together a vast empire across Europe, North Africa, and the Near East. Many modern highways trace their roots, a testament to the durability and foresight of Roman engineering. However, this infrastructure came at a significant human cost. The workers who built and maintained these roads labored under strenuous conditions, often compelled by military duty or servitude. Their lives, marked by physical hardship and limited recognition, remind us of the unseen foundations of empire. The absence of their voices in contemporary records raises questions about how history values labor. The focus on rulers and generals overlooks the countless individuals whose toil made empire possible. Archaeology helps fill some gaps, but much remains lost to time. Reflecting on these silent builders prompts broader considerations. How do societies remember and honor the labor behind great achievements? In what ways does infrastructure shape social and political realities? And what parallels can we draw between ancient road builders and the workers who build and maintain our modern world? As you walk along these ancient roads in your mind, consider, the countless footsteps that once pressed the stone's footsteps of those who helped forge one of history's greatest empires, yet whose stories remain largely untold. In the cloistered world of a medieval monastery, far from the noisy towns and bustling markets, gardeners worked in quiet diligence. Their hands shaped the earth around sacred walls, cultivating plants that sustained both body and spirit. These gardens were not mere decoration, but essential to the monastery's self-sufficiency and religious life. Monastery gardens were carefully planned spaces that blended utility with symbolism. Herb gardens provided medicines and spices, vegetable plots supplied food, and orchards bore fruit. Each plant had purpose, whether for healing ailments, flavoring meals, or supporting religious rituals. The gardeners themselves were often lay brothers or hired workers, skilled in horticulture, yet living humble, often overlooked lives. Their daily tasks included planting, weeding, watering, and harvesting. Seasonal rhythms governed their work as much as the monastic hours governed prayer. Monks believed that tending the garden was a form of prayer, a meditation on creation and order. Gardening connected them to God's creation in a direct, tactile way. At the same time, the practical need for food and medicine made the garden a vital part of monastery survival, especially during harsh winters or famines. The techniques used were surprisingly advanced for their time. Gardeners understood crop rotation, soil enrichment, and companion planting. They cultivated native and imported species, experimenting with plants from distant lands brought by trade or crusades. Socially, gardeners occupied a unique place, neither fully monks nor common peasants. Their work bridged spiritual and practical worlds, supporting the monastic mission while engaging with the rhythms of the natural world. As you imagine these tranquil gardens and the hands that tended them, questions arise. How did gardening shape the daily life and spirituality of the monastery? What knowledge did gardeners preserve and pass on in a largely oral culture? And how did these small acts of cultivation influence broader medieval society? Beyond their serene beauty, monastery gardens were repositories of valuable knowledge and vital resources. Gardeners cultivated not only food, but an array of medicinal herbs that monks used to tend to both the community and the wider population. Medicinal plants such as rosemary, sage, and fennel grew in neatly arranged beds, their uses carefully recorded in herbal texts. Monks and gardeners worked together to harvest, dry, and prepare remedies for ailments ranging from digestive troubles to wounds. This knowledge, often preserved in manuscripts, was passed down through generations. The gardens also played an economic role. Surplus produce and herbal preparations could be traded with local villages or pilgrims, bringing needed income to sustain the monastery. Some monasteries became centers of horticultural innovation, experimenting with grafting techniques or new plant varieties introduced through contact with the Islamic world. Gardeners' expertise was vital in these endeavors. Their practical skills and observations contributed to the refinement of medieval agriculture, influencing rural practices beyond monastery walls. In this way, the quiet labor of gardeners echoed throughout the broader medieval landscape. Socially, the gardeners often formed a close-knit group with shared knowledge and traditions. Yet their status was ambiguous. As lay workers, they were outside the strict monastic hierarchy, but essential to the community's well-being. Their lives were shaped by both the rhythms of the garden and the expectations of the monastery. Despite their importance, gardeners rarely received recognition beyond the monastery grounds. Their work was essential but invisible, supporting spiritual and physical life in equal measure. As you consider these quiet cultivators, think about the interplay between faith, science, and labor in medieval times. How did the preservation and transmission of herbal knowledge shape later medicine? What social dynamics emerged around this vital but unseen work? And how did these gardens connect monasteries to the wider world? The humble monastery gardeners left a lasting imprint on the history of agriculture, medicine, and cultural preservation. Their work helped sustain monastic communities through centuries of upheaval, while quietly shaping broader European practices. The herbal knowledge cultivated in monastery gardens formed the foundation of Western medicinal traditions. Manuscripts, like the Herbarium Apuleius or Physiologus, gathered botanical wisdom that influenced Renaissance scholars and later scientists. Gardeners' hands-to-earth experience ensured these plants thrived and could be studied, bridging oral tradition and written knowledge. Monastery gardens also served as early models of sustainable agriculture. Techniques like crop rotation, composting, and companion planting promoted soil health long before these ideas became widespread. Such practices informed rural farming, contributing to improved yields and resilience in medieval society. Culturally, these gardens embodied a synthesis of spirituality and practicality. They were spaces of contemplation, healing, and labor, quietly reinforcing the monastery's role as a center of learning and refuge. The gardeners' lives remind us that behind grand religious and historical narratives lie countless small acts of care and cultivation. As you reflect on the silent gardeners, consider, how do we value the everyday labor that sustains larger institutions? What can the intersection of faith, science, and work teach us about resilience and knowledge, preservation? And how might these lessons from medieval gardens resonate in today's world of ecological challenges and cultural change? Picture the vast, untamed landscapes of the American West in the early 1860s. Rugged mountains, endless plains, and shifting weather that could change from blazing heat to freezing cold within hours. In this vast expanse, a daring system of communication sprang up, the Pony Express. At the heart of this network were the mail carriers, often young, slight riders tasked with traversing hundreds of miles on horseback through dangerous terrain. Their job was simple in description, but perilous in practice. Deliver mail faster than any before, connecting Missouri to California in about 10 days. The Pony Express operated during a brief window from April 1860 to October 1861, but its impact was significant. Riders passed mail in a relay system, switching horses every 10 to 15 miles at stations scattered across the frontier. Each rider covered up to 75 to 100 miles per shift, often racing through hostile territory. The riders themselves were a diverse group. Many were teenagers or young adults seeking adventure or steady income. Their physical stature was important. Lighter riders meant faster horses and less fatigue. Training was minimal. Much depended on riding skill, endurance, and nerve. Life on the trail was isolated and risky. Riders faced weather extremes, wild animals, and potential attacks by bandits or hostile Native American groups. Injuries were common, and riders carried firearms for protection. The work demanded not just speed, but keen survival instincts. Despite these dangers, riders took pride in their role as vital connectors of a growing nation. The mail they carried included personal letters, government dispatches, and newspapers, lifelines for settlers and officials alike. As you imagine the dust and thunder of hooves across the plains, consider what motivated these young riders to face such risks. How did the Pony Express shape communication and expansion in the American West? And what stories remain untold about the people who made it work? Life as a Pony Express rider was anything but glamorous. The reality was a relentless cycle of riding, hard, battling weather, and navigating isolated stations spread across harsh landscapes. Riders often began their days before dawn, preparing their horses and gear for the grueling miles ahead. Stations, spaced roughly 10 to 15 miles apart, were hubs of fleeting rest. Here, riders swapped horses, exchanged mailbags, and sometimes shared brief meals or shelter. Station keepers, often families living in remote outposts, played a crucial role in maintaining the network and providing support to riders. The solitude of the trail was profound. Riders spent long hours alone, with only the wind and their horses for company. The threat of attacks from outlaws or Native American groups, defending their land added tension to every mile. Riders needed not only physical endurance, but also mental resilience to face isolation and danger. Weather posed another formidable adversary. Sudden storms could transform trails into mud. Freezing temperatures could numb fingers, and scorching heat could sap energy. Horses, too, suffered under these conditions, requiring care and rest despite the pressing schedule. Despite hardships, riders formed a unique camaraderie. Stories and legends circulated about daring escapes, close calls, and acts of bravery. The role carried a certain prestige in frontier communities, symbolizing speed, reliability, and connection. Economically, the Pony Express was a costly operation. Riders earned modest wages, often supplemented by tips or gifts from grateful recipients. The system was ultimately short-lived, replaced by the telegraph, but its legacy endured in American folklore. As you picture the lonely riders galloping across endless horizons, ask yourself, how did isolation shape their character and decisions? What networks of support enabled their survival? And how did their work influence the development of communication and settlement in the West? Though the Pony Express lasted only about 18 months, its impact resonated far beyond its brief existence. The riders who braved treacherous terrain and isolation symbolized the determination and spirit of a nation. Rapidly expanding westward, the network hastened communication across vast distances, shrinking the continent in terms of time and connection. While soon rendered obsolete by the telegraph, the Pony Express became a cultural icon of speed, courage, and frontier endurance. Yet, many riders faded into obscurity, their stories overshadowed by legends and myths. Records were sparse, and the dangers they faced rarely fully recorded. Some riders died young, their sacrifices unacknowledged beyond small frontier communities. Their legacy persists in American folklore, literature, and even modern media. where the Pony Express epitomizes daring and perseverance. The riders' lives remind us that behind national progress lie countless individuals enduring hardship and uncertainty. As you reflect on these forgotten carriers, consider, how do we balance myth and history in remembering the past? What lessons do their stories offer about communication, connection, and resilience? And in our own time, how do we honor those who keep vital networks running, often unnoticed? Along the rugged and often treacherous coastlines of the 18th century, solitary figures tended beacons of light that saved countless lives. Lighthouse keepers, tasked with maintaining these crucial navigational aids, played a vital role in maritime safety during an era when sea travel was fraught with danger. These keepers lived in remote towers or cottages perched on cliffs or islands, isolated from towns and communities. Their days were governed by strict routines: trimming wicks, refilling oil lamps, cleaning lenses, and ensuring the light shone brightly through fog, storms, and darkness. The technology of the time was primitive by today's standards. Oil lamps required constant attention, and lenses often made from glass or polished metal needed regular cleaning to maximize light projection. Weather conditions posed constant challenges, with salt spray corroding equipment and storms threatening the keeper's safety. Life in the lighthouse was lonely. Keepers often lived with family members, but many spent long stretches alone, cut off from society. Their isolation tested their mental and physical endurance, with little distraction beyond the endless sea and the duty to maintain the light. Despite their importance, lighthouse keepers received little recognition. Their work was dangerous and demanding, yet largely invisible to the broader public. Ship captains and coastal communities depended on their vigilance, but official records often mention them only in passing. The role required a blend of technical skill, discipline, and resilience. Keepers needed to understand the mechanics of their lamps and lenses, weather patterns, and navigation basics, all while coping with solitude. As you picture these quiet sentinels watching over stormy seas, consider, what was the daily rhythm of life like for these keepers? How did they cope with isolation and responsibility? And how did their work impact maritime safety and coastal communities? The daily life of an 18th century lighthouse keeper was a continuous battle against the elements and loneliness. These keepers often endured fierce storms, bitter winters, and scorching summers, with little respite. Their duty to keep the light burning was unrelenting, as any lapse could mean disaster for ships navigating dangerous coastlines. Storms tested the structural integrity of lighthouses and the keepers' resolve. When gale-force winds howled and waves crashed against rocky shores, keepers climbed narrow staircases to tend fragile lamps, refilling oil and trimming wicks with hands numb from cold or shaking from exhaustion. The risk of injury or worse was ever present. Isolation shaped not only their physical lives, but also their mental states. Some keepers kept journals or letters, documenting the passing days and the wild seas, while others turned to religious faith or routines to stave off despair. Visits from supply boats or occasional nearby fishermen were rare moments of human contact. Families living with keepers faced unique challenges. Children grew up in solitude, often learning to be self-reliant early, while spouses managed household duties with little external support. The social life was minimal, creating a tight but limited family dynamic. The technology they managed was a constant focus. Oil lamps required high-quality fuel, and lenses, sometimes employing early versions of the Fresnel lens, demanded meticulous care to remain effective. Keepers learned to repair and maintain equipment, becoming skilled technicians by necessity. Communities valued the keeper's work, even if official recognition was scant. Coastal towns depended on the safe passage of ships for trade and communication, linking economic well-being to the keeper's vigilance. As you imagine a lone figure, braving a tempest, tending a flickering flame, ask yourself, how did these keepers balance solitude with duty? What strategies did they develop to endure physical and emotional hardships? And how did their presence shape the safety and economies of coastal regions? The legacy of the 18th century lighthouse keepers endures in the safety and security they provided to countless seafarers. Their unwavering commitment to maintaining the light through storm and calm helped prevent innumerable shipwrecks along perilous coastlines. While many of these keepers lived in near anonymity, their work was foundational to the growth of maritime trade and coastal communities. Their labor ensured that goods, news, and people could move more safely across seas that were often unforgiving. Technological advancements in lighthouse design and lighting, such as the later invention of the Fresnel lens, owe much to the careful maintenance and feedback from keepers who understood the practical challenges of these systems. Their hands-on experience shaped improvements still relevant to navigation today. The emotional toll of isolation and the physical demands of the role were immense. Yet, keepers endured with quiet resilience, embodying a form of service rooted in vigilance and responsibility. Their stories remind us of the unseen sacrifices behind even the simplest acts of safety. Reflecting on these solitary guardians, we can ask, how do we honor the everyday dedication that keeps critical systems running? What can their endurance teach us about the human capacity for perseverance in solitude? And how do the quiet acts of past generations continue to illuminate our present? In medieval Europe, bridges were more than just practical structures. They were vital links that connected communities, enabled trade, and shaped the landscape. Yet, the men and women who built these bridges, often skilled but anonymous, laborers and craftsmen, remain largely overlooked in history. Bridge building in the Middle Ages was a slow, labor-intensive process. Without modern machinery, workers relied on simple tools like chisels, hammers, pulleys, and wooden scaffolding. Stones were quarried by hand, shaped meticulously, and transported to often difficult sites. The process began with careful site selection, balancing factors like river flow, soil stability, and proximity to roads or settlements. Foundations had to be dug deep, sometimes underwater, requiring ingenious methods such as cofferdams, temporary watertight enclosures, to create dry workspaces. Masons and laborers worked together under the supervision of a master builder or architect. While the master planned the design, much depended on the practical knowledge of the workers who managed the stones and mortar. Their hands shaped arches and piers that could endure floods and the passage of centuries. Bridges, like the famous Pont Saint-Benacet in Avignon or the Charles Bridge in Prague, showcase the remarkable durability achieved by medieval builders. Yet, the lives of the craftsmen who laid each stone remain mostly unrecorded. buried beneath the structures they created. The social status of these builders varied. Some were respected guild members with specialized skills, while others were common laborers earning meager wages. Their work was dangerous falls. Crushing injuries and drowning were real risks. As you imagine the slow, methodical work of lifting stones, fitting arches, and mixing mortar, consider, how did these builders acquire and pass on their craft in an era before formal engineering? What social and economic factors shaped their labor? And how did their bridges influence the growth and cohesion of medieval societies? The daily rhythm of medieval bridge builders was shaped by seasons, weather, and the relentless demands of their craft. Work typically began at dawn and continued until dusk, with short breaks to eat simple meals like bread, cheese, and ale. Builders faced physical exhaustion from hauling heavy stones, climbing, scaffolding, and mixing mortar under often harsh conditions. Winter posed a particular challenge. Cold weather slowed mortar setting, and icy rivers made foundations perilous. The knowledge these workers relied on was largely experiential, passed through apprenticeships and oral tradition within guilds. Guilds controlled training, standards, and wages, offering a measure of protection and status, but also enforcing strict hierarchies. Safety was a constant concern. Scaffold collapses, falling stones, and accidents with hoisting equipment were common. The absence of formal safety regulations meant that workers' survival often depended on experience and vigilance. Despite hardships, builders formed close-knit communities, shared labor, meals, and the collective goal of completing enduring structures fostered bonds. Festivals and religious observances punctuated their lives, offering respite and connection. The bridges they built facilitated trade routes, pilgrimage paths, and military movements, profoundly influencing medieval society's growth and cohesion. Yet, the personal stories of these laborious fathers, sons, and neighbors remain mostly hidden in archives or lost to time. As you picture these craftsmen bending over their tasks, balancing skill with brute strength, ask yourself, how did their work shape the physical and social landscape of medieval Europe? What did their lives reveal about labor, community, and resilience in a pre-industrial world? And how do their enduring bridges continue to connect us to the past? The bridges built by medieval craftsmen have endured centuries, surviving floods, wars, and the passage of countless feet and carts. These structures stand as silent witnesses to the skill, perseverance, and quiet dedication of their builders' laborers, whose names may never be recorded, but whose work shaped Europe's physical and economic landscape. The durability of medieval bridges stemmed from a deep understanding of materials and geometry, developed over generations. Their arches, designed to distribute weight efficiently, allowed for the construction of longer spans without modern materials. This ingenuity laid the groundwork for later engineering advances. These bridges fostered trade and travel, linking distant regions and facilitating the exchange of goods, ideas, and culture. Pilgrims crossing stone spans to reach holy sites, merchants transporting wares, and armies moving through strategic routes all relied on these vital structures. The social fabric of medieval communities was strengthened by these crossings, turning isolated villages into connected towns and cities. The labor and craftsmanship embedded in each stone reflect a broader story of human resilience, adaptation, and cooperation. As you contemplate these enduring arches, consider, how do the unseen hands of history shape our world? What does the longevity of these bridges tell us about the balance of tradition and innovation? And in our modern era, how might we honor the labor and knowledge of those who built the foundations beneath our feet? In the quiet chambers of medieval monasteries, a different kind of labor-shaped history, painstakingly copying manuscripts by hand. The scribes of monastic scriptoria were guardians of knowledge, culture, and religion during a time when books were rare and precious. These scribes worked in dimly lit rooms, surrounded by parchments, quills, and ink. Their task was exacting: to reproduce texts accurately, from religious scriptures to classical works of philosophy and science. Mistakes could alter meaning, so meticulous attention was vital. Scriptoria were often isolated within monasteries, with strict routines governing the scribes' days. Work was slow, sometimes taking months or years to complete a single manuscript. The process involved preparing vellum, mixing inks, ruling lines, and careful writing in calligraphic scripts. Beyond copying, scribes sometimes illuminated manuscripts with decorative initials and illustrations, adding artistic value that has fascinated historians and art lovers alike. These illuminations required additional skills and extended the time needed for each book. The scribes themselves were usually monks, dedicated to both religious devotion and intellectual labor. Their work was considered a form of prayer, contributing to the spiritual life of the monastery and the broader Christian community. Despite their crucial role, many scribes remained anonymous, their names lost to time. Yet their collective effort preserved vast bodies of knowledge through centuries of upheaval and change. As you imagine the slow, deliberate strokes of a quill on parchment, consider, how did this labor shape the preservation and transmission of knowledge? What was the daily life and mindset of these silent scribes? And how might the physical act of writing influence the way ideas were understood and passed on? The daily life of a monastic scribe was shaped by discipline, ritual, and the relentless pursuit of precision. Scribes often began their day before dawn, balancing their copying work with prayers, communal meals, and other monastic duties. Their schedules were governed by the canonical hours periods set aside for worship throughout the day. Working conditions were humble and austere. Light was limited, often coming through small windows or candles, which strained eyes and made the work slow and tiring. Parchment preparation was an art itself, cleaning, stretching, and cutting animal skins to create the smooth surfaces required. For writing, errors were a constant concern. A misplaced letter or smudge could compromise an entire manuscript's integrity. Some monasteries developed systems for proofreading, with different monks reviewing completed sections to catch mistakes. The intellectual environment of the scriptorium was rich, despite its silence. Scribes had access to texts spanning theology, philosophy, law, and science. Copying was not merely mechanical. It involved understanding content to some degree to ensure accuracy, and sometimes involved annotations or corrections. Monastic scribes also played a role in cultural transmission beyond their walls. Their copies circulated to other monasteries, universities, and eventually courts, spreading knowledge across Europe. This labor helped preserve classical works that might otherwise have been lost during times of turmoil. The isolation and monotony could weigh heavily on scribes. Some turned to marginalia, small drawings or notes in manuscript margins as a form of personal expression or relief from routine. Others found solace in the meditative nature of their task. As you picture a scribe hunched over a manuscript, quill poised in hand, ask yourself, how did this meticulous labor influence medieval intellectual life? What personal sacrifices and joys did scribes experience? And how does their work continue to affect our understanding of history and knowledge? The labor of monastic scribes formed the backbone of medieval knowledge preservation. Without their painstaking copying, many classical texts, religious writings, and early scientific works might have vanished during centuries marked by warfare and social upheaval. Their work ensured that ideas from antiquity reached later generations, laying the groundwork for the Renaissance and modern scholarship. The physical manuscripts they produced were precious objects, treasured for their beauty as much as their content. Yet the scribes' contributions went largely unrecognized, often anonymous. They toiled in quiet dedication, their names and personal stories lost to history. Their humility was a testament to a broader monastic ethos of service and devotion. The act of writing by hand shaped not just what knowledge was preserved, but how it was understood. The slow, deliberate process invited reflection, and the artistic embellishments added layers of meaning and cultural richness. Reflecting on these silent scribes, we might ask, how do we value the unseen labor behind the knowledge we inherit? What can their patience and dedication teach us about preserving culture in times of uncertainty? And in an age of digital information, how might their legacy inspire us to slow down and appreciate the weight of words? In Victorian England, the figure of the chimney sweep was ubiquitous, yet their harsh reality often remained invisible to the middle and upper classes who depended on their labor. These workers, many of them children, climbed narrow, soot-filled chimneys to clear blockages and prevent deadly fires. Sweeps began their day before dawn, gathering their rudimentary tools, brushes, scrapers, and rope sand, setting out to clear soot and creosote from chimneys that powered countless homes and factories. The soot was relentless, coating skin, clothes, and lungs, leading to chronic health issues. Children were frequently employed because their small size allowed them to squeeze into tight flues, a dangerous practice with little regard for safety. They faced risks of suffocation, falls, and long-term respiratory diseases, conditions poorly understood or ignored at the time. Sweeps often lived in poverty, their work low-paid and stigmatized, yet their role was vital for public health and safety, preventing chimney fires that could engulf entire city blocks. Their work also connected them to the very fabric of Victorian industrial life. Despite these dangers and hardships, chimney sweeps formed communities and traditions, stories, songs, and symbols like the famous sweep's blessing offered moments of cultural identity amidst hardship. As you picture these soot-covered figures climbing silent chimneys at dawn, consider, what was the lived experience of these workers? How did society view and treat them? And what does their story reveal about child labor, industrialization, and social change? Victorian chimney sweeps faced a grueling existence marked by danger and social neglect. Their days were governed by the relentless need to climb, scrub, and clear the soot that coated London's ever-growing network of chimneys. Many sweeps were young boys, sometimes as young as 5 or 6, apprenticed or even forced into the trade by poverty and circumstance. The work itself was physically exhausting and perilous. Children climbed narrow, twisting chimneys with little to no safety equipment, often carrying heavy brushes or scrapers. Soot inhalation led to chimney sweeps cancer, a form of scrotal cancer, and chronic respiratory illnesses. Though these medical realities were not widely acknowledged or addressed, social attitudes towards chimney sweeps were ambivalent. On one hand, their work was essential for preventing deadly fires and maintaining household heating. On the other, sweeps were stigmatized as dirty, poor, and expendable. Many sweep families lived in overcrowded, squalid conditions, compounding their hardships. Despite these challenges, chimney sweeps developed their own subculture. Apprentices learned from older sweeps, sharing knowledge about techniques and survival. Folklore, songs, and the symbolic sweeps blessing offered moments of connection and hope. Legislation to regulate chimney sweeping began to emerge later in the 19th century, but enforcement was patchy and progress slow. The gradual decline of child labor in the trade reflected broader social shifts towards labor rights and public health. As you imagine the grime and danger surrounding these young workers, ask yourself, how did chimney sweeps maintain resilience amid such hardship? What forces delayed reforms to protect them? And what does their experience tell us about the costs of industrial progress? The story of Victorian chimney sweeps is one of resilience amid hardship and gradual social awakening. Over time, public awareness of the dangers faced by these workers, especially children, grew, fueling campaigns for legal reform and better working conditions. The Chimney Sweepers Act of 1875 marked a significant, though imperfect, milestone. It aimed to ban child labor in the trade and enforce safety standards, but enforcement lagged behind legislation. Still, this law represented a broader shift. In Victorian society, many sweeps left the trade as alternatives emerged, and mechanized chimney cleaning devices reduced reliance on human climbs. Yet the cultural imprint of chimney sweeps remains in literature, art, and public memory as symbols of industrial hardship and social reform. The sweep's story challenges us to consider how progress often comes at the expense of the vulnerable, and how societal change can be slow and uneven. Their lives remind us of the unseen labor and sacrifices underpinning modern comforts. As you reflect on the soot-streaked faces and brave climbs of these workers, ask yourself, how do we balance economic development with human dignity? What lessons from the chimney sweep's struggle remain relevant today? And how might we better recognize the everyday heroes behind essential yet overlooked labor? The Janissaries were an elite infantry unit that formed the backbone of the Ottoman military for centuries. Their origins trace back to the 14th century, when the Ottoman sultans developed a system to recruit and train soldiers from Christian boys taken through the devshirm, or child levy, a practice that shaped their unique social and military identity. These boys, often taken from Balkan Christian families, were removed from their homes and brought to the capital, Istanbul. There, they underwent a rigorous and lifelong training program to become loyal soldiers and administrators of the empire. Their daily life was regimented, combining military drills, religious instruction, and education in arts and sciences. Discipline was strict, and obedience to the Sultan was absolute. Over time, Janissaries developed a distinct culture and camaraderie rooted in their shared upbringing and service. Beyond their military role, Janissaries often wielded significant political influence within the Ottoman state. They could be patrons of art, music, and architecture, and sometimes played kingmakers in palace intrigues. Yet, the human cost of the devshirme system was profound. Boys were forcibly taken from their families and communities, stripped of their original identities, and reshaped into instruments of imperial power. Their transformation raises questions about identity, loyalty, and power in the empire. As you imagine the young recruits' journey from bewilderment and separation to disciplined soldiers, consider, how did this system affect the boys personally and socially? What tensions arose between their origins and their roles? And how did the Janissaries influence both the Ottoman military and society over time? Once inducted, Janissaries followed a strict regimen balancing military readiness with religious and social obligations. Their mornings often began before sunrise with prayers, reflecting the deeply intertwined nature of faith and service within the corps. Training included physical exercises, weapons practice, and tactical drills designed to keep the soldiers prepared for various battlefield scenarios. Beyond combat skills, education in literacy, theology, and Ottoman law was emphasized, creating soldiers who were both fighters and administrators. Life within the Janissary barracks fostered a strong sense of brotherhood. The men lived communally, sharing meals and participating in ceremonies that reinforced loyalty to the Sultan and the corps. This unity helped maintain discipline and morale, but also bred a powerful corporate identity. Over time, the Janissaries' political influence grew, and they began to resist reforms that threatened their privileges. Their role evolved from elite soldiers to influential actors in Ottoman politics, sometimes acting independently or even rebelliously. Despite their prestige, Janissaries lived under constant pressure to maintain their status. The threat of expulsion, loss of privileges, or punishment loomed for those who faltered in discipline or loyalty. As you picture the day-to-day life in the Janissary corps drills, prayers, communal meals, ask yourself, how did this intense structure shape the men personally and socially? What were the benefits and costs of such regimented life? And how did their growing power affect the Ottoman state's stability and evolution? By the 17th and 18th centuries, the Janissaries' role had shifted from disciplined soldiers to a powerful political force within the Ottoman Empire. Their privileges, including tax exemptions and influence in court affairs, made them formidable players, sometimes obstructing necessary military reforms and contributing to the empire's gradual stagnation. This transformation led to tensions between the Janissaries and the sultans seeking modernization. Several attempts at reform were met with resistance, rebellions, and violence. The corps' reluctance to adapt became a symbol of the empire's broader struggles with change. The culmination of this conflict came in 1826 with the auspicious incident when Sultan Mahmud II forcibly disbanded the Janissary Corps after they revolted against reform efforts. The Corps was crushed in a violent confrontation, ending centuries of influence. Despite their controversial legacy, the Janissaries left an indelible mark on Ottoman military, political, and cultural history. Their unique origin, strict discipline, and eventual political power revealed the complexities of empire building and institutional change. Reflecting on the Janissaries, consider, how do institutions evolve and resist change over time? What human costs are hidden behind military and political power? And how does the story of the Janissaries illuminate the challenges faced by empires balancing tradition and modernization? In the 19th century, lighthouses were vital for maritime safety, guiding ships safely past rocky coasts and treacherous waters. The keepers who maintained these beacons led lives of solitude and routine, essential yet often overlooked in history. Victorian lighthouse keepers lived in isolated towers or cottages, sometimes alone or with small families. Their daily responsibilities included lighting and maintaining the lamps, polishing lenses, and ensuring the mechanisms worked flawlessly through all weather conditions. The work was demanding. Keepers faced harsh winds, storms, and the relentless spray of the sea. They worked long shifts, often with little contact with the outside world. Their days measured by the steady rotation of light and shadow. Life was punctuated by simple routines, checking oil supplies, cleaning the lamp's glass, logging weather and ship sightings, and performing minor repairs. Despite the monotony, vigilance was constant, for even brief lapses could lead to shipwrecks. Social life was limited. Communication with the mainland was rare, sometimes only by occasional boat visits. Keepers often relied on books, journals, and personal hobbies to pass time. As you imagine the lonely keepers watching over dark seas, consider, what psychological effects might such isolation have had? How did these individuals cope with monotony and danger? And how did their quiet vigilance shape the safety of entire coastal communities? The daily routine of a Victorian lighthouse keeper was a blend of exacting tasks and long stretches of solitude. Every evening, as twilight deepened, the keeper would prepare the lamp-trimming wicks, filling oil reservoirs, and lighting the flame with care. The light had to burn steadily through the night, serving as a beacon for ships navigating perilous coasts. Maintenance was a constant necessity. The Fresnel lens, a delicate optical apparatus, required careful cleaning to keep the light sharp and visible. The mechanisms turning the light were oiled and adjusted regularly, each component critical for flawless operation. Weather added unpredictable challenges. Storms could batter the lighthouse, isolating keepers for days or weeks. Supplies might dwindle, and communication with the mainland could be cut off. During such times, keepers had to rely on their resourcefulness and endurance. Psychologically, the isolation could be heavy. Keepers often kept journals or wrote letters to maintain a connection with the wider world. Some found solace in reading, music, or small hobbies. The presence of a spouse or family sometimes mitigated loneliness, but many lived entirely alone. Despite their seclusion, keepers were part of broader networks. They reported ship movements and weather observations, contributing valuable information to maritime safety and early meteorology. As you picture the keeper maintaining the light through endless nights and stormy weather, ask yourself, how did these routines shape their character and resilience? What impact did isolation have on mental health? And how did their steadfastness protect countless lives at sea? The Victorian lighthouse keepers' quiet vigilance was foundational to maritime safety during a period of expanding global trade and naval power. Their work helped prevent countless shipwrecks, safeguarding both lives and economic interests. As technology advanced, introducing automated lights and later electric lamps, the role of the keeper changed and eventually diminished. Yet, their legacy remains a testament to human endurance, dedication, and the often unseen labor that underpins public safety. Lighthouses became symbols of hope and guidance, and the keepers, the silent custodians of that symbolism. Their lives, marked by solitude and routine, remind us of the personal sacrifices made to maintain the smooth operation of vital infrastructure. Reflecting on their story, consider, how do we honor the invisible labor that keeps societies functioning? What does the lighthouse keeper's life reveal about the human capacity for patience and responsibility? And in a modern world of automation, what lessons might their experiences teach us about connection, purpose, and resilience?